Thank you all for joining us tonight for a special, very special conversation with my new best friend, Chris Packham. We will be discussing taking the UK government to the High Court over their delays and scrapping of key climate targets, and also exploring why this is such an unlawful and genocidal decision. Instead of imprisoning people who are peacefully protesting and fighting for a livable future, the real criminals should be charged. Understandably, the UK Prime Minister is the nation's climate gaslighter in chief. He makes noble speeches to the world about the terrible dangers of runaway climate change, while running a government doing everything possible to ensure those dangers kill billions. So a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. So I did this bit too early, but we're doing it again now. Tonight's talk is recorded, but it will only be the speakers who are seen. It will then be uploaded onto the Just Stop Oil YouTube channel over the next few days. So if you need, captions option is enabled. You can find this option in your toolbar. This talk will be about an hour, followed by a 20-minute breakout rooms for those who would like to join. If there's any trolls, mad people trying to disrupt, even though we do like a bit of disruption, but let the tech and co-hosts know via the chat. So the tech/co-hosts, let them know via the chat and they will deal with it. So during this call, we will also be asking you to download Signal Messenger. So that is our way of communicating and integrating people directly into the community. And the Signal link will be posted in the chat. Okay, so before we get speaking to Chris, I just wanted to briefly introduce myself. I'm hosting the talk this evening for you guys, so thank you so much for being here. So yeah, you're not seeing things. I am the person who was just in that music video. Yeah, my name is Louise Harris. I'm 25 now, not 24 anymore. I'm a singer-songwriter and a supporter of Just Stop Oil. So yeah, you may recognize me from, well, the music video that was played a few minutes ago, or you may have recognized me from a year ago when I climbed a gantry above the M25. I did an emotional testimony, it went viral, I was demonized in the media, as you do, and I was imprisoned. I was remanded to Bronzefield prison for 8 days. I was then subject to an ankle tag, a GPS ankle tag for a month, so I couldn't leave my hometown. And yeah, so I've taken, over the last 2 years, I've taken action multiple times with Just Stop Oil, non-violent direct action. Most recently, I didn't plan this at all, but I was actually arrested for singing that song that you just heard, We Tried, outside Rishi Sunak's house, which yeah, I'm currently not allowed in London at all, and that's been my conditions for 2 weeks, even though I'm obviously a singer-songwriter and my living and my career depends on being able to go to London to do open mics and gigs and interviews. So yeah, the police clearly don't want a climate Christmas #1. So yeah, not only is it illegal now to march in the road and even protest on the pavement, but it's also illegal to sing. And this is all whilst the real criminals are walking free. Rishi Sunak, Claire Coutinho, in that music video, I show the faces of, our murderers. That's who they are to me. These people are in power. They have so much control and influence about what's happening, and they're using that to make themselves money. And it's murder through oblique intent in my eyes. So then they may not be doing it, well, they're probably not doing it to kill people, but they know that what they're doing will kill people, and that's somehow justified to them because it will make them money and benefit them themselves. Just an example, Rishi Sunak, he signed $1 billion deal. His family made $1 billion deal with BP a week before licensing over 100 new oil and gas licenses. It's just so obvious what's going on. It's like we're in a satire or something. Even COP28, the CEO is an oil, the president of COP28 is an oil CEO. But the point of my song and my message is basically this climate crisis, it affects me and my family in the same way it affects you and your family, but it's deliberately written from this future perspective, the one that we're currently hurtling towards if we don't change things, which is irreversible climate catastrophe, irreversible societal collapse, and losing everything that we love. But I wrote it deliberately in that way to get people to emotionally connect with how they would feel if this actually happened. But whilst then realizing we still have time to prevent this from ever happening. And how do we do that? How do we stop this from happening? Well, if we think about the people in power, in my eyes, you know, they may be psychopaths, they may be narcissists, but what I've concluded is they must not know what love is, because if they did, why would they be doing this? But what matters is, we can't control, you know, them, but what matters is I know what love is. And I'm sure everyone on this Zoom knows what love is. We do, and we outnumber these people 8 billion times over. So all we have to do is come together and unite. We're so much bigger, we're so much more powerful. And that means uniting, for me, through collective climate action, not individual. So that includes a mass protest movement, mass civil disobedience. History has shown, I showed in the music video, the suffragettes, the civil rights movement, you know, history shows that the most successful way of enacting rapid social change on a radical scale, which is the one we need now, the most, you know, the quickest way to do that is through civil disobedience. It's worked in the past, so we need to do it again. And yeah, so basically, yeah, if you want the climate crisis to be pushed to Christmas #1, which means it's #1 on the political agenda, it will be heard by millions of people on the official Radio 1 Christmas charts. And because it would be Christmas #1, the media wouldn't be able to, like, you know, just not report on it. They would have to, because it's the biggest deal of the whole year in terms of music. So if you want that to happen, you can buy it. You can buy it. Links will be shown in the chat throughout this Zoom. But, you know, vote for your music choice. Vote for a future. You know, there's no politician that I can see at the moment to vote for. It's all pointless. But, you know, at least this can, you know, music can move people. It can inspire people. And hopefully people do feel moved and empowered to join us and to join the climate movement as a whole. And just to say, last thing is, all proceeds of the song go to climate causes. So it should be a mass fundraiser for the climate movement, including for Just Stop Oil, but predominantly a mass mobilizer to get people involved. And buy it, don't just stream it, because one purchase affects the charts 100 to 600 times more than a stream. So we need a climate revolution. It's already begun in the global south. It's been happening for years and years. People are dying. We need the West now to have a proper revolution. So that's my little introduction. Okay, so on to the main act. We are so thrilled to be joined by Chris Packham tonight, and to have a conversation with him about charging the real criminals in this climate catastrophe. So during this conversation, if you have a question that you would like to ask Chris, then submit it through the Q&A function or in the chat, which sends directly to a co-host. We will have time for a few questions from the audience. We will also be hearing from the amazing Sam, an invaluable Just Stop Oil supporter, who will share more about what we do, why we're doing it, the campaign, the action phase, and his own experience personally. The talks are then followed by optional breakout rooms. The breakout rooms are a space if you want to join a Just Stop Oil facilitator in a smaller room to discuss how you felt from the talk. And that will last for about 15 minutes. And yeah, I really encourage doing that. Vitally tonight, we will be asking you to take a poll. How do you say that word? Poll, one of them. Not like a poll that you can slide down, but like a little questionnaire one. We'll be asking you to take a poll a little later on. In this poll, you will choose an option for how you can get involved and help Just Stop Oil. So these pathways to action, I'll tell you them now. So #1, most importantly, people are donating. So 1 hour's income per month. So if you earn £10 in an hour, donate £10 a month. That is what people are doing. Links will be posted into the chat now. Donating will ensure that we can support everyone who wants to join the campaign to play their vital part. This is the lifeblood of allowing this campaign to continue. So the links for donation will be posted in the chat. So #2, people are attending a non-violence training. So that's where you learn the skills, you learn resilience to join us in civil resistance and feel part of our community of trust. #3, people are volunteering. So much goes on behind the scenes and every hand on deck is so valued. You can attend or host a local talk. You can ring people interested in Just Stop Oil, do admin, video editing, police station support, wellbeing support. You can collaborate with other Just Stop Oil supporters in your area, leaflet or flyer. So, you know, if you're bored, bloody sign up, because there's a lot to do there. And for #4, finally, the 4th option is to join in taking action. So if you're interested in taking action with Just Stop Oil in our next action phase, then select this option in the poll later. So please make sure you stay until the poll so you can help us all continue the fight against climate injustice. How could you refuse that? Okay, without further ado, let's get started. So it's always so deeply appreciated to have Chris Packham to join us. It's so weird me introducing Chris Packham as if like I don't know him and like we've been just like buddies the last week. But anyway, I will introduce you, Chris. Chris Packham has led an extraordinary life. He's gained recognition as a naturalist, television presenter, writer, photographer, conservationist, campaigner, and filmmaker. He's always been active and vocal about wildlife and conservation issues, injustice, and in recent years, the escalating climate crisis. He has stuck his head above the parapet to publicly support Just Stop Oil, championing the voices of young people taking direct action in the climate emergency. So remember, if you have any questions for Chris, please submit to tech and co-hosts via the Q&A function, and we will choose a few to ask. Okay, so Chris, welcome. How are you doing?
I'm very well. Thank you. Always a pleasure to join you. Before we start, can I just say how much I appreciate your singing and songwriting skills. I love your song, as you know, because we've been corresponding about that. I think it's very poignant. It's very powerful. I actually like it in a rather beautiful way, despite its clear messaging. Obviously, we wish to do everything we can. So I just want to reiterate the point that you've already made. If you haven't heard the song before, then please buy it on iTunes. It is about 600 times more valuable than streaming it. And trying to spread our message out into other parts of our culture is intrinsically important. We can't just talk to ourselves. We've got to talk to people who basically don't typically engage with our messaging. And that might be through music in this instance, or it could be through art, it could be through sport, it could be through any other part of our culture. And I think it's one thing that our part of the protest activist movement really needs to concentrate on now, is making sure that we get greater reach. So I hope you get great reach with your song. I love it. I think it's brilliant.
Thank you so much. And just, it goes without saying, thank you so much for supporting it as much as you have. Okay, on to you now. So Chris, one place I wanted to start, in case people aren't aware of what you're up to. So can you tell us about the campaign you've launched, taking the UK government to the High Court, and why you're doing it?
Well, in the summer, I made a programme with Channel 4 entitled provocatively, Is It Time to Break the Law? And obviously people are breaking the law already. I think our question was more pertinent, is how far do we go when it comes to breaking the law in order to affect the social changes that we need to implement to address climate breakdown, biodiversity loss, and so on and so forth. Essentially to turn our decision makers globally around and make sure that they focus on the inherently far more important issues at hand. My conclusion from that is that we needed a portfolio of abilities to instigate action, because not everyone will be comfortable to be arrested or be incarcerated or to sue the government. Some people may only at this stage be comfortable to sign petitions or maybe turn up for a march, a peaceful demonstration, so on and so forth. But our mission is to involve as many people as possible. So what I'm doing, I consider as a form of protest. I am essentially taking the government. Mr. Sunak in September made a series of announcements reining back on the UK's net zero commitments. So I believe that those commitments were enshrined in law, the Climate Change Act, and they were enshrined in that law after essentially public consultation with Parliament and also with the Climate Change Committee. So in order to change those commitments, which he appeared to do on the spur of the moment on September the 20th, I think that was potentially not a legal action. Now, whether he or his secretaries of state for energy, security, net zero, or transport, as the issues that I'm contesting are about the changes in zero emission vehicles and also broadly gas boilers, and the changes that we needed to make using those as a means of reducing our essentially the UK's carbon footprint. I think is immaterial. The fact is that we went through a lengthy process of consultation before Parliament. It went before the Prime Minister whilst he was the Chancellor, and he signed off the cost of that. And we know, of course, that that will come at a tremendous cost. And we know that now, times have moved on, we are in a cost of living crisis. I would stress that we're principally in a cost of living crisis because of the tragic war in Ukraine, which has pushed the price of natural gas up. And state the bleeding obvious in that had we invested in renewable energies before that, we wouldn't be in quite such a crisis now, of course. So to basically increase and prolong our dependence on fossil fuels at this time is an entirely fallacious thing to do. So that's the background of why I'm taking the claim. There are other aspects to it. One, a lack of transparency, from both a public and also from a governmental point of view in terms of how those policies stand at any particular point in time. And also, if you'll cast your mind back to September the 20th, the Prime Minister was also talking about reneging on promises that concerned 7 different bins, a meat tax, so on and so forth, none of which appear to have any real foundation. Now, the one thing I have to say at the outset here is that what I'm doing is not something that only Chris Packham can do. I am exercising any citizen within the UK's rights under something called the Aarhus Convention, a piece of European legislation, which means that we as UK citizens have a right to information and justice. And so there are reasons why it might be easier for me to go down this route than some people, but I'm not the only one. There are plenty of other people across the UK who have used this type of legislation to call our decision makers to account. And ultimately, I think that's what it's about. It's about accountability. It's about sending a very clear message that you're not above or beyond the law. The laws have been enshrined, and these laws have been enshrined to protect all of us, every single last one of us, and not just here in the UK, but around the world too. So you cannot simply glibly, on a whim, change or break those laws. That's the fundamental case that I'm taking.
Absolutely. And just on that, just your point about anyone can take Rishi Sunak, etc., to the court. But I can only imagine though, like I feel like it's almost bizarre that we're having to do it and there's no international kind of bodies that are taking him to court. Like, how does it feel, as a citizen of the UK, that you're the person that has to be doing this?
Well, from a very personal point of view, I don't see that I have a choice. I'm sure many people on this call recognise that those decisions are not advantageous to our hope of a bright, healthy future. And as a consequence, we should challenge them at every opportunity. This is an opportunity for, in this case, myself to challenge those in a way where, a legal way through the courts. There's no risk to myself other than financial, but I should stress as well that the Aarhus Convention has a cost cap which you can call into place. So obviously, if this case is prolonged, it would generate an enormous expense when it comes to the government legal department, indeed my own lawyers at Lee Day. But there was a cost cap that can be called into play there. And that cost cap is really important. And that's an intrinsically, important part of the legislation, which means that therefore we can all afford to take these cases. So it's not that we have a right to, but also that we can afford to take those cases. So I would urge any participants tonight, if there is an issue of significance like this, then do explore that capability, because as I've said, it's not just Chris Packham. Other people in the last few years have exercised this form of legislation to hold people to account. Ultimately, listen, I've been watching the news today. I see that Graham Stewart, the junior minister who was left at COP28 to, engage in the negotiations on our behalf, that's us, the people of the UK, has rushed home early. One presumes, and I can only say presumes, because he is needed to be there to vote on the Rwanda issue, which is playing out as we speak. What we saw was our Prime Minister attending the talks for a very brief period of time, spent more time on his private jet than he did on the ground. We saw our a Secretary of State for Energy Security and Net Zero there for a few days, but coming home early. I don't think personally that this sends out the signals of responsibility that I expect from our government at this critical point. And I'm sure it's not just myself that feels that way. And I know that within government, that's the case as well, because even today, Conservative MP Chris Skidmore had said that it's clear that this is showing that our government doesn't see climate security as a priority in any way, shape or form. So we have a very serious issue here, and that is that our elected representatives, both in the UK and around the world, are simply not doing what we need them to do at the right time. So everything, it's all, at this point, it's all hands to the tiller. We've got to make sure that we are doing everything we can to guide them in that direction.
Absolutely. So could you clarify for our audience today, so what exactly are you hoping to charge Rishi Sunak with?
It's not a question of charging him, because the way that this plays out is that I have an application for judicial review, and a judicial review means that both sides of our argument, my argument being that, the government wasn't in a position to renege upon these commitments without public consultation, parliamentary consultation, climate change committee, so on and so forth. And the arguments which they will put forward will be scrutinised by judges. So this is not going to trial. There won't be a jury. It will be our submissions, mainly documentary, although there will be presentations from my lawyers will go before the judiciary, and they will make a decision on whether there is a strong case to take this to our judicial review. And a judicial review is quite a serious undertaking, because it basically gives us the opportunity to challenge these decisions in their fundamental form. Has all due process taken place? And if it hasn't taken place, why not? And can that be validated or justified? And I've took one of these cases before, a similar process, different case, with HS2, and about how the decision to continue with the HS2 project after a review a few years ago, undertaken during Boris Johnson's and Grant Shapps as Minister of Transport at the time, and about how the decision was made to continue with that project. We weren't initially granted our judicial review, but we were granted the application to appeal, which we did. I felt that and of course I would, I felt that the judgment made on appeal didn't stack up, but you could therefore argue that I had lost, and I'd crowdfunded. A lot of people had given very generously to take that case, as they already have to take the case that we're talking about tonight. Did we lose? Well, not really, because during the course of that period, taking this legal action gave myself and many other people, everyone from the Wildlife Trust to Stand for the Trees, the opportunity to make a lot of noise and generate a wider understanding of the issues that we were contesting. And I think that these days that's as important as standing on the steps of a courthouse with a big smile on your face having won. It's about creating conversations. It's about generating awareness. It's about changing people's minds and making sure that they fully understand the impact of some of the disastrous decisions that are being taken or not being taken on our behalf.
Absolutely. And well, that's such an important point, having conversations about this. And one very kind of important conversation, I guess, is whether climate collapse is considered genocide. So obviously the Just Stop Oil position is that, yes, Rishi Sunak and the UK government are guilty of genocide through climate collapse. But what do you think? Is climate collapse genocide? What does climate collapse actually mean for people, the planet and society?
Well, the word genocide comes with connotations, and it comes with definitions. And you can obviously research this online if you like. So typically, I have to say, and being an autistic pedant, genocide applies to the persecution of a particular people. So not all people, therefore not all humans. So one would argue that it would be focused upon a group of people. And sadly, historically, we've seen it foisted on peoples for their political, their social, their religious, their racial, I mean, all sorts of hideous reasons, but not on everyone. So whether genocide is quite the right term, in grammatical term, I think is open for discussion. I would say an easier term to use in this sense is ecocide, which doesn't only apply to our species. From my perspective, I think it's important because I love all life, everything that creeps, climbs, slithers and stings, everything. And ecocide applies to life. And I would make a strong case that some of the decisions that are being or decisions that aren't being made by governments around the world are certainly potentially ecocidal in their outcome. There is no question about that. But just going back to the genocidal point, and if you look into those definitions, there are certain criteria, and one of them is that to motivate and manipulate a genocide, there are certain things that those agents need to do. One of them is classify people as different, so it becomes us and them. So if you ask me directly, do I see that now? I say I do. I do see a definition. It's us, the climate protesters, the activists, the scientists, those people who are trying to, deal with this issue, versus them who are very much averse to dealing with it. And that division, I think, is growing, unfortunately, stronger. So that classification is there. What I also see off the back of that is polarization, and I see that through the propaganda that's being generated by the right-wing press. We are eco-loons, we're eco-nuts, we're eco-zealots, we're eco-something unsavory, and that polarization is extremely helpful, but I believe it's being deliberately motivated and calculated. So that is not good. There's no question about that. And then the other thing, and then again, intrinsically a part of that is the discrimination. And again, we are being discriminated against. And we see that, I mean, as well as I do, that more than 600 people have been arrested through peaceful protest in the last month, 40 days, whatever it happens to be. And we've got 9 climate protesters in jail at the moment, 2 of them with excessively long sentences. We know that Phoebe, our colleague, is in jail at the moment. Our thoughts go out to her. Morgan has been released today. Great news. I saw a picture of him eating a perhaps not quite so healthy breakfast on social media this morning, but whatever, he deserved it. So no criticism there. But we're seeing draconian penalties being handed down by the judiciary. We're seeing an increasing amount restriction on our ability to protest, and I think that's that discrimination in terms of restriction of our fundamental civil and human rights is something that we, whether we're climate protesters or whatever we are, we should be resisting. There is no a question about that. And then the last component, I think, which is intrinsically important if you look at the history of genocide, and again, I stress there is ambiguity about whether that can be applied in the context that we're talking about, but whatever, is hate speech. And I mean, I'm not joking. Spend 5 minutes, no, don't spend 5 minutes looking at my social media. The barrage of hate speech, which is foisted upon yourself, Louise. I saw something really seriously unpleasant in one of the national newspapers the other day about your extremely eloquent, emotional and heartfelt song. And that we see on social media is all part of that process which moves us towards the destabilization, the discrimination, and the ostracization of our movement. And that's something that we simply have to resist, and we have to do it peacefully as we are, and we have to do it democratically when we can, suing the government, but we have to do it with increasing ferocity, energy, anger and determination, because we are in a time of crisis.
So absolutely, I agree with that. I haven't seen that post that you're on about, but for good reason. So in terms of, so you use the word ecocide, and that climate breakdown is an ecocide effectively orchestrated by the ruling class, the government and the media. So why do you think they've gotten away with it for so long? You know, why hasn't something been done sooner?
Well, I think I'd sort of bring it back to basic human traits, really. The human species is very good at cure, and very often we solve our problems. Sometimes, unfortunately, we have to do that violently. Other times we do it creatively. Let me draw a parallel with a recent human catastrophe, the COVID epidemic. There were many people telling us that we were vulnerable to a pandemic. We had the wherewithal to put in place the ways of ameliorating and reducing the impact of that. We didn't do it, and tragically millions of people died. However, within 8 months or so, we had an effective vaccine which has saved millions of lives. So, classic, no prevention, even though we knew we needed it, but brilliant at cure. And I think if you look at history, that repeats itself. We have always come up with solutions when we're under pressure. And there are many that I could draw parallels with in the Second World War, 70 years ago. Again, a period of time when globally our species was under stress for very different reasons than climate breakdown, but nevertheless, our species was under stress. And if you look at what our species, and not, I mean, I'm a pacifist, so I'm not going to claim that, the ability to generate weaponry, for instance, was a great human advancement. But what I'm telling you is that the energy that was motivated, the determination that was motivated to solve problems, not necessarily in a creative way or in a way that we would support now, was profound. Frankly, in a very short space of time, we came up with penicillin. We came up with, abilities to treat wounded soldiers medically that we never had before. We radically transformed the way that we organized our industry, our communication, our technology. We made technological advances, that were far more rapid than we ever had done before. So this indicates to me that one of the key problems that we face at the moment is that and this is tragic, but we, and I'm sure everyone, most of the majority of people on this Zoom know that we in the global north are not suffering to the same degree as those in the global south. And we're not feeling that pain, and therefore we are not reacting to it adequately and rapidly enough. I watched a news report this evening about a landslip on the Isle of Wight that, due to excessive rain during the course of the last year, was affecting 8 houses. It's almost as if that tragic flood in Libya, where a dam collapsed and potentially killed 14,000 people, not risk 8 people's houses. I understand that no one on the Isle of Wight is at personal risk at this time, right? It's almost like that just doesn't exist. And that disconnect is what's harming us. And I think that until we collectively in the global north, in Europe, in the UK, start to feel that some of that pain, then unfortunately, tragically, very sadly, and with no, I don't know, shining conscience, are we going to do enough about it rapidly enough? That's my opinion. So our job at this point, as protesters and activists and people in this field, is to bring that news, tell the truth to those people, make sure they understand that 8 homes on the Isle of Wight, I mean, I pity those people losing their homes, of course we do, but in the grand scheme of things, our job is to paint the real picture, to tell that truth, and make sure that it's understood broadly and more rapidly than it is being disseminated by our media at the moment.
Absolutely. So in terms of then the solution, so could you speak to us about the diversity of tactics in combating climate injustice? So, non-violent civil disobedience, which fights against the draconian laws, but then also using the law to seek accountability
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And I touched upon this at the beginning. And I think that at this point, right, and I touched upon this at the beginning. And I think that at this point, it's important that, we bring to our fold, if you like, as many people as we can. And we know that people have increasing concerns, but they sometimes, I was writing slogans for my T-shirts this afternoon. And I came up with one, and I wrote down, if you stick your head above the parapet, it may well be cut off. But if you don't stick your head above the parapet, you'll never see what's going on. Now, the key thing is that we need to make sure that we can invite people to partake in a way that they feel secure. So for some people, that will be writing to their MPs or elected representatives, potential or otherwise. It may well be encouraging them to vote for people who that's just literally put a cross in a box, passively put a cross in a box, but passively after serious consideration as to what will happen as a result of putting cross in a box. So, that's a very powerful tool that we have in what remains of an increasingly undemocratic country, but whatever, we have that. It may well be that those people can sign petitions, they can come on peaceful marches and so on and so forth. There will be other people who have the courage, who are brave enough, like Marcus and Morgan, to have given up their freedom and to be, punished in the most despicable way, incarcerated for 2 years, 3 years at a time. But that's not everyone. You yourself at the moment are playing, I think, a very important role. You have written a piece of, as I said, very emotive music, and you've thrown that out to an audience which otherwise may not engage with Just Stop Oil, may not engage with any of the groups but that your funds will support. So reaching out into those other branches of culture is implicitly important. And I think that I'm working with Emma Smart at the moment, and we have the 3 M's that we need to consider in our campaigning. The first is motivation. What motivates people to want to make a difference? If that motivation, if it doesn't engender sympathy or empathy, then that's a loss. So you need people to be able to sympathize and empathize with your motives. The second thing is the method that you use. If that method isn't working, change that method. Okay. If that method is getting all of the news, then that's no good, because the third M, message, isn't getting across. And I think that in order for us to be effective campaigners, we need people to sympathize and empathize with our motives. We need them to understand and respect our methods. And critically, those methods need to get the message across. And if those 3 M's aren't being met, then we as a force are not acting to our maximal efficacy. And at this time, we can't afford to do that. And that's why I think that when it comes to shaping climate activism, biodiversity, all of these, animal welfare, all of the things that concern us, we've got to take a good, strong look at ourselves at this point. This is our last chance. We're running out of time. We've got to score hits. We've got to, frankly, get to number 1 in your parlance, and therefore we need to be perhaps cleverer, more self-critical, and sometimes we have to, to sacrifice, some of our ideas if they're not working, and change tack.
Absolutely. I think that's a really important point you've just said there, that everyone can be doing something, everyone can be involved in this climate movement. It's just what role that takes, that varies. If you're an amazing accountant, then you can be an amazing accountant for a climate group in your local area, etc. And I just want to put out there one very easy way for everybody on this call to send Rishi Sunak a direct message is to gift We Tried on iTunes, and he gets an email, so we could spam his emails. But yeah, thank you so much, Chris. And yeah, I have massive respect for what you're doing and taking Rishi Sunak to court. So thank you so much for doing that. So we're also just going to have a couple of questions from the audience. So apologies, everyone, we won't be able to go through them all. So the first audience question that a lot of people have asked is, what do you think of COP28? The fact that it was run by an oil firm's boss and that there were more fossil fuel lobbyists than delegations in 10 countries, but also, what the possible final vote is going to be.
Well, as we know, it's gone to penalties, as it has done in the last quite a few COPs, to be quite honest with you. At the moment, they're talking about phasing out. That's what our government is talking about, or was, before Graham Stewart came home. I don't know what they're talking about now. The trouble is the language of the COP is never binding. So it's what actions could they take, and it's left to those individual nations whether they decide to take them or not. It's a process which has meant that people have gone and made pledges and promises, but they've never been bound in national law. So when obviously we saw Trump pull out of the Paris Agreement, a former climate agreement, and he pulled out as soon as he was elected because there was no national law in the United States which could prevent him from doing that without an enormous amount of trouble. So I think that, from a personal point of view, if I'm very honest with you, I like dialogue. I like creative conversation. I like people working towards, I would say, constructive compromise, transition. But maybe, like many people, I've lost faith in our COPs. I mean, when you have it held in Dubai, and when you assign the presidency to someone who is head of an oil company, and when you learn before it even opens that they've been trying to do side deals, frankly, folks, I think you're doomed. And I listened to Alex Sharma, who's a man I have a tremendous amount of time for. I witnessed him at work at the COP26 in Glasgow. He did a remarkable job in very difficult circumstances. And I heard him speaking on Radio 4 this morning. And, of course he's a politician, and of course he treads a line, but he also tells the truth. And the fact of the matter was that Alex Sharma said this morning that we need a deal here which says, no more fossil fuels, that puts an end to fossil fuels. And without that, I don't think we're going to get a meaningful outcome. But that's our problem. And I think that, maybe these COPs are simply burning themselves out, frankly, in terms of their meaningful status. It's interesting, isn't it, when you get Antonio Guterres, head of the UN, and it's a UN process, and he's basically standing there, and to paraphrase him, and he may not appreciate it, I suppose, but he's saying it's not working. And so maybe we rip it up and start again. I don't know.
Yeah, I completely hear what you're saying, that there's a lot of people, I'm sure, involved in that process that are very well intentioned. But yeah, at the end of the day, there's been more COPs than years I've been alive, and emissions have gone up every single year. So yeah, we really need to question, is that working? So the second audience question for you. So we've got a question from Michael. So Michael says, "Hi Chris, did you decide that you needed to break the law? I eventually felt that I had to, and maybe you can show us your t-shirt slogan."
Okay, well, I'll show the t-shirt slogan first. It says, sometimes you have to make trouble to make a difference. And I think that's the case. And when I was writing that slogan, I kind of like the word trouble. Trouble is a word which is broad enough for it to be naughty, or very naughty, or very, very naughty indeed. And I think you can choose your definition of what trouble is. It's a word that allows that flexibility. So did I decide to break the law? I have a decision. What I have to do is to be, and I've just intimated this, is to be maximally efficient. Now, if I were to break the law, and currently that would mean that I would be at the mercy of courts that could incarcerate me for a significant period of time, then I would be largely silenced for that period of time. And I think at this point, that's probably not the best course to go down. I think it's best for us to be able to exercise our voices. Do I imagine that at some point in the future, I may inadvertently break the law, perhaps by just wearing a t-shirt, because we have seen people arrested now for just wearing t-shirts or holding up, indeed, placards with the law enshrined on them. The jury's right to exercise their conscience, etc., has seen people arrested. we're living in very febrile times, aren't we, really? As we've said, our essential human rights when it comes to protests are being quite considerably eroded. I don't know what the future holds, Mike. All I would say is that if you've made that conscious decision yourself, then think about the implications of that decision upon I don't know how old you are. It may well be that you're a young person. That might impact on your education. It may therefore impact on your family. It may impact on your family even if you're not a young person, because you may have dependents. What I would argue is that we all have a role to play, and the portfolio is such that we don't all have to do every bit of it. I don't think that you have to be a sort of a fully tattooed on 10 out of 10 activist. You have to be imprisoned. If you have that capacity and that's what you choose, that's a decision you can make for yourself, but don't feel any pressure from the rest of the community. What we need you to be is effective. So think about how you can be most effective. It might be that you think you could be most effective breaking the law. It may be that you'll make my decision, which is that at this point in time, I'm most effective not breaking the law. Well, maybe not breaking the law, but not being incarcerated for breaking the law.
Yeah, I completely hear you on that. I completely agree, actually. I mean, from my perspective, I think the only way to change is a mass protest movement, including civil disobedience, but the role that each person plays in that completely varies. We need people behind the scenes volunteering, supporting those who are getting arrested. So yeah, I absolutely hear you on that. Okay, Chris, I would talk to you forever, but the time has ended now. Thank you so much for coming on today. We really appreciate it, and just massive respect for what you're doing constantly.
Thank you very much. And can I just say thank you to all of those people that supported the crowdfunder for the case that we've been speaking about. That was extremely generous. We're obviously all aware that there's a cost of living crisis, so dipping into people's pockets at this time is not always easy. Rest assured that myself, my lawyers at Lead A, will do everything we can to make sure that we not only exercise the law, but we use the opportunity to talk about that as broadly and as publicly as possible. So we'll be making plenty of noise about it for obvious reasons. And then lastly, as I say, thoughts go out to Phoebe, who's in prison tonight, for her determination, motivated by a fear for her future. And the idea that young people in particular, but not just young people, are being penalized when essentially they are canaries in a coal mine, that I think in very short term will be highly regarded members of our species history, is quite tragic. Morgan, I hope you've got a pint in your hand now, and you've got over your rather greasy breakfast that I saw you eating. And I'm about to draft a letter for Marcus Decker's solicitors, who are doing everything they can to stop him being deported when he's released from prison. So if there's anything that everyone who's involved in this Zoom can do to support those people who have already been severely penalized for exercising their democratic right to process, can I urge you to do that? Because I'm sat in my cozy kitchen, I'm about to have a glass of wine, and there are other young people in prison, and they're not going to be enjoying that. And I think they deserve our support.
Thank you so much, Chris. And just to let you know, Phoebe is out. Good news. I saw her.
Oh, she's out.
She is out. Yeah. I wasn't sure whether to correct you there, but I was like, I will bring.
Oh, you must. I didn't know she was out. I haven't heard from her. She was stringing it out, hoping that I was going to be more sympathetic for longer.
All right. Thank you so much, Chris.
All right. Well, if you speak to her, give her my best wishes. She's an absolute hero.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
All right. Good night.
Good night. So we are now going to hear from the brilliant Just Stop Oil supporter, Sam G. So Sam Griffiths is 48 and is a designer and a dad living and working in northeast London. He got freaked out when 40 degrees hit London, and since then has been doing everything he can to help support Just Stop Oil, including getting arrested and going to jail, but also using his design skills, helping make our amazing graphics. You might remember the expression "Comic Sans until Sam is free" circulating social media while Sam was in prison on remand. That was a time. It's such a pleasure to have you here, Sam. Over to you.
Oh, well, thank you for that lovely introduction. And it's impossible to follow Chris, but I'm going to attempt it. I'm just going to talk a bit about disobedience or constructive naughtiness, and just in terms of like broad terms, but then I'm going to have a quick overview of like how I've been naughty, and then I'm just going to take you through the last action phase as well, and just show you some like a quick whistle stop tour of the last like 5 weeks of action with Just Stop Oil. But yeah, in terms of disobedience, I think the powers that are ranged against us in terms of what we face, in terms of a criminal government, and you know, the powers of oil and finance, and all of it can feel united into this kind of monolith, the kind of granite, unyielding monolith. But I'd like to argue that every act of disobedience is a crack in that monolith. And this is the hope that I have in every time I step out into the road and every action that we take. Every bit of every action of disobedience is another crack. But more importantly, when we act as a community and we act with an aligned strategy, we can create not just cracks, but fissures through that monolith. So with the action phase that we just had, we were explicitly cracking open a fissure between the police and the court system and the CPS and the judiciary by applying maximum pressure on all of them. We were pushing, every time we stepped out into the road, we were pushing it to arrest, which meant that the police had to arrest many of us. We were also non-compliant through that arrest, and each of us chose to which degree we would be non-compliant. So that meant, some of us were lifted to the police van, and then some of us chose to be lifted from the police van into the police station, and then through the search process, through to being photographed and fingerprinted, and then my friend Cressy also was unbelievably non-compliant in court as well. So there's a whole spectrum of disobedience with this, and every stage of that non-compliance was another little crack in the system, and to the point now where I think the large majority of us who were arrested in this last action phase, we were arrested under Section 7, which is part of this really repressive and authoritarian Public Order Act. And the advantage for us is that we can choose whether these cases are seen in magistrates or Crown Court, and many of us have chosen to push it to Crown Court. The Crown Court cases will take longer, they'll be more expensive to run, but also we get access to a jury. So we get, we could face stiffer penalties, but we get to be judged by our peers, which I think is really important. So this is a thing, this is kind of a thought I want to just embed with everyone on this call, is that every individual act of disobedience is a crack, but when we act together, united in common purpose, we can really crack open the system. And through the course of this last action phase, we came very close to winning. We with the police issued a statement that they were getting to the stage where they couldn't cope with our protests and the Palestinian protests together. If we just had a few more people, we just came so close. So I just think there's so much hope in action, and there's so much hope in collective disobedience. Just from my point of view, just so you know where I'm coming from. So I as Louise said, after 40 degrees, I got absolutely freaked out. I couldn't sleep. I was terrified about my son's future, and boarding up the windows with cardboard to try and keep the temperatures down, thinking it's only going to get hotter, and it is. And I just thought, I've got to act. And then I saw Just Stop Oil were saying the right things, and more importantly, they were doing something, and they were treating this absolutely catastrophic situation they were treating it like seriously, and it was so important. And I just thought, all right, I've got to be part of that. And since since then, I've taken action since October 2022, and I was in court today for my first arrest, which was on October 2nd on Waterloo Bridge, and subsequently I've been arrested another 9 times, and then most recently in this action phase I was marching for 15 minutes and then was remanded to Wandsworth prison for 21 days, which is well, frankly, fucking insane. And I wore this T-shirt in court because this is what we should be doing, and this is what I'm so grateful to Chris for doing. Is bringing the legal system to bear on the real climate criminals, which is our government and the associated powers. I just want to have a quick view of just behind me. These are the letters and postcards that I received when I was in Wandsworth Prison, and this is just evidence of the beautiful community that we have around us, and all of that meant so much. Anyway, I'm going to jump into some slides so I can show you something visual now. So I'm going to show you the autumn collection, which is a summary of the last action phase, featuring the colour of resistance, which of course is orange. In the run-up to this action phase, we had a couple of cultural actions. This was these beautiful people did their best to stop this coach of migrants getting its way to the Bibi Stockholm, which is the disgusting prison ship off the south coast. We had this fantastically iconic protest at the Wellington Arch. And then this fantastic bit of symbolism at the Natural History Museum with these 2 doctors and their beautifully simple action there. That led up to the first week, which kicked off at right at the end of October. There were 115 arrests in this week, 61 of which were on the first day in Parliament Square. There were over 1,000 press mentions for this first day of action, which is huge. You know, for slow marching, which you don't think is naturally kind of a big press draw, we gained a lot of attention. 2 days later, we had the second day of action. That's me in the top right, just taking a break. This just shows this evidence of our non-compliance. So after we were arrested, many of us chose to lay down on the ground before we were then carried to police vans. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we carried non-compliance through into the police stations and in some cases through to the courts. The big part of this non-compliance was that we'd already written to Sir Mark Rowley, the chief of the Metropolitan Police, giving him evidence of the genocidal crimes that are being committed right now, and that if he committed to investigate those crimes, we would withdraw from non-compliance. But we haven't received any such assurance, so we maintained our non-compliance throughout this action phase. Just a quick shout out to Alex and some of the other people who have organised the talks that have brought people in. So in this action phase and in the run up to it, we've had 600 people in over 40 in-person talks, but also 3,000 people have attended over 50 online talks since August. And this has been a fantastic way to bring people into the movement. On the second week of action, it was kicked off with the Mums March. And talking to friends, this has been a fantastic way for people who have not so far been engaged with Just Stop Oil. It's been another route in, you know, and I know a lot of people have found it very moving in terms of the people who've taken action, how they've taken action in this march. On the same day, there was the Rugby Venus action. This is echoing a very famous suffragette action 100 years ago, where they had an action on focused around the same painting. I think at that time they slashed the painting, and in here we broke the glass. So it's an emergency, and it is time to break the glass. Here it got over approaching 2,000 press mentions, which again is really made a huge impact in the media. On the same day, we had another slow march in Whitehall. Day 8, another 1,000 press mentions. This is a whole bunch of arrests on Waterloo Bridge. Big shout out to our non-violence team. So everyone who takes action with Just Stop Oil and steps out into the road is trained in non-violence. It's a core principle to like everything that we do. And we've during this action phase, we've had 44 non-violence trainings all over the country. So there's been a huge effort to bring people in through those trainings. Day 13, we were down in Holloway. Day 14, we're in Hendon. It looks a bit like there's been an attack of sleeping sickness, but this is just more consistent non-compliance. Day 17, we're down in Holloway. And day 18, we're back in Whitehall. Day 19, this was the Saturday of the second week, I think. So this is Saturday, the 18th of November. So there's a large march which started just outside of the Shell headquarters, which you can see at the back there. They, for the purposes of that march, they put hoardings all around the building to protect it from us, and there was a huge police presence as well. So it's very clear who the state is protecting. You know, it's not us; it's the oil companies. And here are just a few words from people who were remanded during this action phase, and all of these words were spoken in court when people were remanded. Week 4, we had another 56 arrests. That started with the banquet, and all of these lovely people came together to celebrate what we'd achieved so far, and you know, this was just an opportunity to also to build our community. Day 21, this was in the third week, I think third or fourth week of action. Here we evolved our tactics somewhat. So we started each of these marches in Trafalgar Square and ran non-violence trainings on the spot, so to enable people to join our marches on an ad hoc basis. That's my friend David getting arrested on day 22. Day 24, back in Trafalgar Square. Also on day 24, we had this beautiful action in St. Paul's. So Judy and Sue here, they took part in this beautiful, eloquent action where they walked to the centre of St. Paul's and then unveiled these two banners. The one on the left there says, excuse me, "Will our children thank us?" So this was on Thanksgiving, and it was during the Thanksgiving service. And they then walked very slowly back out of St. Paul's, and it was a very quiet and deeply respectful protest, respectful of the space and the people, but also massively confrontational. And I think it was just so eloquent, you know, quiet and stately, but very eloquent and very confrontational. And the next day, we're back in Trafalgar Square. This is Evan getting arrested. And then a quick shout out to the people who have been put on remand in this action phase. There were 10 people in total. 6 of them are students, and you know, you can see their ages now. They're from ranging from 18 to 24. Thankfully, Ruby, Phoebe, and Kiara have been released, but Noah, who's 18, he's in also. He was jailed in and is in Wandsworth prison right at the moment. Then there's Ella and Cressy who are still on remand. So if you can write to them, it means a lot. And here's a quote from Cressy on the top here. And then there's a quote here from Cal, who he hasn't been remanded, but he did his damnedest to be. He was arrested so many times during this action phase, and kept his resistance all the way through the court phase, and told his truth in front of every judge he was put in front of. Week 5, there were 36 more arrests. Again, back in Trafalgar Square. Same for day 28, so day 28 and 29. Day 31, we were in Downing Street with these heroes. And then later in that evening, there was this action outside one of Rishi Sunak's many homes. which you heard Louise speak about. She sang here. I think there were some other songs. People banged their pots and pans, and there was a couple of speeches. And then everyone you can see here, and a few people outside of the frame, were all arrested and held for over 20 hours. And yeah, just the mind boggles, really. And then our last day of action in this action phase, the students came together and they marched towards the Supreme Court, and also focused on the CPS, and basically marched in solidarity with the people remanded and imprisoned for taking climate action. And it was another very eloquent action. I'm just going to leave you with another couple of words, couple of statements from people who were remanded, and again, these were spoken in court. And then just a really quick overview. So over the course of this action phase, so over 5 weeks, 669 people were arrested, 10 of whom were remanded in prison. 13 of those were bailed with an electronic tag, which is basically house arrest. 240 were held to court, and 406 of them were released next day. So that's just a huge amount of police custody and jail time for people who have stepped up in this action phase. And I just want to, like, collectively just recognize the courage and the huge effort that's gone into this action phase across everyone who stepped into action, but also across all of the essential support roles. So that's people who have helped plan things and made all of those things possible, but also have been in there for police station support. So when people have come out of the police station, there's always been someone there to welcome them with a vegan snack and a smile and an apple, and it's so welcome. And then people doing court support as well, taking notes and making sure that there's a friendly face in the back of the courtroom. It's just all of those things are so important. So just like a massive thank you collectively to everyone who's been involved. And that's your lot.
Thank you so much, Sam, and thank you so much for everything you've done in this action phase. Huge respect to you and for everything that you keep doing. So thank you so much. Amazing. So yeah, I would just like to thank all the speakers today. So Sam and Chris, thank you so much for coming and sharing with us today.